Hello, everyone. I wanted to give you a brief snapshot of what we've been doing in the lab. So remember, the lab stands for Little Athlete Builders. And so with Little Athlete Builders, the idea is to start the strength and conditioning type model to hopefully increase performance inevitably as they grow, these youths grow, but also to diminish any kind of injury risk as they age. But we first need to know where they are in relative to potential injury. And so at the lab, we use objective measures that are evidence-based in order to identify potentially those youths at potential risk of injury. And so those four areas that we focus on in the lab, whether it be resistance training that's appropriate for the age that is participating, whether it's balance, whether it's agility, plyometrics, whether it's running mechanics, we use all those four things that we technically need for youth sport development, but also we need to teach them and encourage motor development in a proper mindset to diminish any kind of risk for injury. And as we do that, we actually increase potential performance. So with that, we decided to take a look at the motor control screen, a little snippet of the FMS, and we also see that motor control screen show up in the Y balance screening test. That the Y balance has been shown to potentially identify asymmetries, whether it's upper extremity or lower extremity. In our case in the lab, we chose to look at the lower extremity due to our population of youth participating. We wanted to look at an area that we know that they would have a relative adequate enough strength stability in beginning to actually assess. Upper body strength is not as developed in our youth. That tends to really grow drastically as they age around that puberty area of life. So we are looking at prepubescent athletes here, and we are looking at prepubescent children who potentially could be athletes. So we wanted to look at some kind of objective measure, and we looked at that motor control screen that's complementary to the anterior reach of the Y balance. You can Google these things and look it up and see what exactly I'm talking about. But with the motor control screen and the Y balance anterior reach, we are assessing, number one, symmetry. Does one limb stabilize better as the other limb reaches, as opposed to the other stabilizing in while the other limb reaches? If there's an asymmetry there that's very drastic, that could lead to potential injury and increase the risk of injury. It's also a very sensitive test as well. And then also we compare that, not only do the left and right comparatively, but we also look at the percentage of one's leg length. We want to be able to have these athletes reach at least 95% of their leg length. Now they're growing, they're very dynamic in their growth. We know they're always changing. So this is why it's important to keep testing and checking this as they grow, so that we can maybe intervene in some of those folks that potentially have the drastic differences between left and right, and also the drastic percentage differences relative to their leg length, left or right. Or who are actually really low compared to just their leg length and their reach performance. So what I have here, we had about 23 participants. We had only about 10 or so actually do the post-test. So they were all able to do a pre-test. Some didn't follow up with maybe absenteeism and that sort with the lab. And we had consent for them to allow us to collect this information. As you can see, there's no names here, so we are not identifying anybody. But what we saw with the pre-test here, of those that actually did the post-test, I only took those that did the post-test. This was their right leg minus their left leg difference. So we're looking at the right leg versus the left leg just in the centimeter reach. how many centimeters difference did they reach compared to the left and the right. And at baseline or entry into the lab, this was their relative difference, the average, okay, of all of those folks that did the pre-test and post-test. And then we have what was the average of those that actually followed through with the post-test. This is their baseline information. What was the percent difference between their right leg relative to their leg length versus their left leg? So we're looking at the percent difference between their reach of their right relative to their leg length versus their left leg reach as a percentage to their leg length. So if we are like 1.79% difference between the left and the right, that's pretty good. If we're at 9.3% difference, that's large, and we need to try to figure out how to correct that and intervene. Same thing with 5, 6, 7%, 8%. 2% is not that bad. 3%, we're within a relatively close difference that it's all right to have some difference. Okay, so this was their baseline of all those that did the pre-test. Now, once they went through the 4 days, once every week of the lab sessions, this is what we had for our post-test. Their left and right leg difference in their centimeter reach was 1.8. And the difference in percentage between left and right relative to their leg length was only 3%. So we took this from almost 5% and dropped it to 2.5%. And so that's a pretty good move for us, right? That's a pretty good improvement because we're within that 3% difference. With that, we also pulled who are the worst of the worst that did the pretest. And so I put those folks right here. And what we found was that the worst of the worst averaged a 5 centimeter difference between right and left reaches. And the percent relative to the leg length difference was 7%. So that was our worst of the worst individuals with their reach. They're not bad people. They just had poor motor control. And so we wanted to see if could we potentially change that. And we did. So we dropped that from 5 centimeters left and right leg difference to 2.3. That's within some of the literature's recommendations for allowable asymmetry between left and right. And then we also improved their percentage of the left and right difference relative to their leg length by 2.8%. You can't quite see that. Sorry, 3.8%. So you can't see that down there, but we had an actual change. The change was 3.8% different from pre-test to post-test. We improved it. And so the average then turned out to be post-test 3.2%. So that tells us, folks, that with our interventions in the lab, just doing some simple age-appropriate resistance, balance, agility, plyometric, and sprint training, running training can in fact improve these asymmetries that we see within left and right. If we can improve asymmetries left and right, then potentially we can reduce injury risk and then also elevate performance as these youths grow. Thanks for listening.